what's up? In this video, I'm gonna show you how to not ruin that $200 piece of beef that you just bought on a whim at the butcher shop. I'll also talk about what exactly prime rib is, how to buy it, how to season it, and how to cook it perfectly every time. Later in the video, I'll show you guys a couple of sauces to serve alongside the roast, as well as a poor man's prime rib that costs about half as much and uses a cut of beef that most people haven't heard of. Before we get started though, I do want to put you at ease. The hardest part of this entire process is actually knowing what beef to buy and then sourcing that beef. The actual cooking part is extremely simple and anyone with a thermometer can get it right. So let's dive into the what to buy part first. To clarify, prime rib is not always cut from prime beef. The word prime might have originated in reference to the grade of the beef, but it's since migrated to the cut or the primal that the roast is made from, which is always ribeye or rib roast. When it comes to buying prime rib, you have three grade options. A grade, by the way, is just the way that the USDA determines beef quality, and that's mainly based on fat content. Select beef is the lowest grade that's widely available to the consumer. It has the lowest fat content and the lowest price. Choice beef has more fat than select, and if you live in the US or Canada, the majority of the beef that you eat is in this category, which is a good thing. Choice beef tastes great. It's more expensive than select, but it's still pretty affordable. Finally, prime beef has the most fat in the USDA grading system, and because of that, it yields the best tasting prime rib, in my opinion. But it's really expensive. Prime rib usually costs about 20 to 30% more than choice beef. Prime rib can be cut from any of these grades of beef. It kind of just depends on how much money you're willing to spend on beef fat. With that being said, how do you go about getting one? Well, I would say a butcher shop is your best option. Grocery stores aren't exactly beef specialists, and the people cutting the meat behind the counter, God bless them, usually aren't that well trained or that knowledgeable about what's in the case. The best move that I found to ensure that you actually get the prime rib that you're looking for is to call a butcher shop 3 to 4 days before you need it and reserve one. This ensures that you get the exact cut of meat that you're looking for, and it gives you the opportunity to call a few different butcher shops and price them out. Now, for this recipe, I recommend prime beef if you can swing it, because it truly is one of the most succulent, delicious meat experiences that a human could ever have. Just be prepared. It's gonna cost a lot of money, but it'll be worth it. For me and people like me, a $200 splurge on a big piece of meat that I get to share with my friends is totally worth it. I routinely spend that amount of money on things that bring me way less joy. Most butcher shops will carry some prime beef around the holidays because there's always people who want to splurge, but most often the beef they have on hand is choice because it's good and most people like the price. The exact cut to ask your butcher for this recipe is a 7 to 10 pound boneless prime rib. Plan on roughly 1.5 pounds per person, assuming you're feeding hungry grown-ups. If you're wondering about bones, I skipped those because I think they make the roast cook unevenly. The bones act as a heat shield that prevents the backside from cooking as quickly as the top side, and as a result, you're always left with some rare meat near the bone. Rare ribeye is tough and not that enjoyable, in my opinion. Also, the ribs take up some surface area that could be much better used for salt and browning. Now, to prep this roast, I'm going to start by scoring the fat cap about 1/8 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter deep, every inch or so going one way. Then I'll score the fat cap going the opposite way. This is really important because it allows the fat on top to render more fully and evenly. If you don't score, you're going to have flabby, chewy beef fat on top of your roast. Now, to season this thing, I'm going to sprinkle, or actually shower this roast in salt, like a lot of salt for each side, and I'm going to go with at least 2 or 3 4-finger grips of coarse kosher salt. Obviously, this salt isn't going to do much to season the inside of this giant roast, but it will create some perky salt forward bites that will help offset the bites from the middle of the roast, which will basically have no perceivable salt. Next, I'll hit this roast with a similarly generous dose of pre-cracked black pepper. The only thing better than salty, fatty beef is peppery, salty, fatty beef. Now, once this thing is liberally dusted with salt and pepper, I'm going to move it over to the fridge to dry brine for at least 4 hours, but preferably overnight. Giving this roast some fridge time also dries out the exterior, which makes it much easier to get a roasty golden brown crust. The next day, I'll pull my prime rib out of the fridge roughly 4 hours before I want to eat it. Then I'll preheat my oven to 500F. While that heats, I'll hit this roast with 10 to 12 ziggies of neutral oil. I'm using peanut, but melted beef fat would also be really good. From here, I'll smear this oil all over the outside of the roast without scraping off the pepper on the outside. The oil helps transfer the oven heat to the meat, and it gets us a much browner result, so don't skip it. Once my beef is all lubed up, I'm gonna drop 2 layers of foil onto my sheet tray to make cleanup easier. Then I'll drop the wire rack carrying my meat onto the tray, then I'll load the whole thing into the hot oven to sear the outside for 15 to 20 minutes. This is what I call a high-low roast maneuver, meaning we start it at a high temperature and we finish it at a low temperature. This is in contrast to the reverse sear method, which is where you start it at a low temperature and finish searing it at a high temperature. Both methods can totally work. It kind of just depends on what you're optimizing for. The high-low is good for overall cook time because it takes about 90 minutes less, and the fat is more evenly rendered throughout. The low-high, on the other hand, is cooked more evenly, meaning that it's going to be perfectly mid-rare from edge to edge, but you're going to be losing out on some of that fat rendering that makes the top part of this roast, or the spinalis meat, really unctuous and delicious. That stuff actually benefits from being cooked a little bit more, in my opinion. And after 20 minutes at 500F, when I pull this thing out, you can see that it is pretty well golden browned. And most importantly, the fat cap has started to render. From here, I'll grab a wireless probe thermometer and drop in 2 probes. This will give me the best idea of how this whole roast is progressing temp-wise, and it'll enable me to get the exact internal temperature that I'm looking for. If you're wondering about an instant read thermometer, that also works. It's just that after the first 90 minutes, you'll need to pull the beef out of the oven every 10 to 15 to check the temperature, which can be a little bit of a pain. Now, I'll remove the burnt roasty foil from the sheet tray, then drop this thing back into the oven to roast at 250F until I reach an internal temperature of 125F, or about 2.5 to 3 hours. While that roasts, let's talk about that budget prime rib. But first, I want to thank Made In for sponsoring this video. The Made In sheet pan that I'm using to roast this prime rib is one of the most used tools in my kitchen. But for me, the real star of my cookware is the Made In stainless collection. Made In designs professional quality products for the home cook, but their products are also used in over 2,000 top-rated restaurants in America. I can say from personal experience that the Made In pans that I've used for the last 3 years, like this 10-inch saute pan or the sauce pot that you're going to see me use later in this video, are the best cookware that I've ever owned. That's because Made In uses a premium 5-ply stainless material, and those layers allow for really great heat retention and even heating. The handles look beautiful and are designed to stay cool on the stovetop, but these pieces can also go from the stovetop to the oven up to 800F. In fact, I like Made In so much that I gifted my sister an entire set of their cookware earlier this year, paid for with my own money. That's not to brag that I'm a generous, loving brother, which I am, just to prove the point that I endorse this product. So to pick up some Made In cookware for yourself, or to give it as a gift to a friend or your favorite sister, head to the link in my description to save some money on your order. Hey Bri, what about that budget prime rib? If you wanted to spend about half the money but still have a great beef experience, grab a tasty little cut called a chuck eye roast. This is the center part of the ribeye muscle that extends deep into the beef's shoulder, or the chuck. This cut is looser grained than a ribeye, but it's nearly as tender and just as fatty. This whole 9 to 10 pound roast cost me $99, which is less than half of what the prime rib did. This roast is kind of a butcher's secret too. In fact, the dude at the shop who cut it for me asked me not to tell anyone about it because they make a lot less money on this than if they sold the chuck roast whole. To cook this, the roast process is exactly the same. Salt and pepper the hell out of it, then throw it in the fridge overnight. From there, drizzle with oil, sear until golden brown, and slow roast at 250F until an internal temperature of 125 is reached. I'll show you the results of this roast later in the video. And after about 3 hours of low roasting, our main character beef is at about 123 to 125F. So I'll pull it out. By the way, the cook that I'm going for here is closer to medium than it is mid-rare. Aesthetically, I think this provides the best eating experience. It makes a lot of sense if you think about it. A mid-rare ribeye tastes great because there's a lot of textural contrast between the grilled or seared exterior and the soft mid-rare interior. On a giant roast of meat where there's very little textural contrast from inside to out, that falls apart and the mid-rare part ends up being a little bit squishy. From here, I'm going to temp this roast with foil and let it rest for 30 minutes while I quickly bust out 2 super easy sauces to serve it with. First up is some flavorful beef jus that will enhance the beefy flavor of the roast and bring a little bit of additional salt. To make it into a saucepan, I'll add 1 box of store-bought beef stock, or about 900 grams worth, then 50 grams of Worcestershire sauce, 25 grams of Better Than Bouillon beef base, and then finally 2 packets of powdered gelatin. Now bring this up to a simmer and reduce for 15 minutes until it's down by about 40 to 50%. 15 minutes later, I've got a surprisingly meaty jus. jus, considering that we just doctored up store-bought stock with bouillon and wurch. To make it that much beefier, I'm gonna drain all of the rendered beef fat and beef drippings from the sheet tray into the saucepan. In total, there should only be about 2 to 3 tablespoons of beef fat, so if you have more, make sure to blot off the excess stuff with some paper towels before you pour it in. The last step is to taste for salt. Wow, that is really flavorful beef jus, considering that this is made from box stock, some Worcester, and a little bit of bouillon. But it does need just a little bit more salt. I thought the drippings were gonna be a touch saltier than they are. I want this jus to be quite salty because remember that roast is only seasoned on the outside and you're gonna put a little bit of jus over your sliced piece and you just want it to be kind of on the upper edge of salty to kind of season the whole thing. And that tastes perfect. Now let's make a quick hot on the nostrils horsey sauce. For that, I'll combine 125 grams of sour cream, 75 grams of mayo, 75 grams of prepared horseradish, 10 grams of water, 3 grams of salt, then I'll grab a whisk and stir until everything is well combined. This horsey sauce has a nice richness from the mayo. It's creamy, it's twangy, it's got a tart bite, and it's super pungent from the spicy horseradish. Okay, once my sauces are made, let's check back on the budget roast. After 3 hours at 250, you can see it's a pretty epic looking roast of beef. When I cut into it, it looks rosy pink all the way through. And she's juicy, guys. Oh my gosh. Let's taste it. Honestly, dude, this is way better than I expected it to be. This is unctuous, fatty, juicy, and super beefy. And the texture is great too. I was really worried about that because this muscle is from the beef shoulder, which is traditionally pretty tough. But like I said before, the ribeye runs through the middle and that's the chuck eye. So we still have a lot of that ribeye tenderness with a lot of the chuck flavor actually. It's maybe even a little bit beefier than a prime rib. It is a little bit more toothsome, but it's not tough. It just has a touch more bite. And honestly, I really, really like it. And for half the price, this is a steal. Time to break into the big dog prime rib. For that, I'm gonna use a slicing knife and slice off the first inch or so. That part's gonna be more medium well, but it's got all the salt and pepper on it, so it's actually gonna be a premium piece worth fighting for. And oh my gosh, dude, look at this beef. It's literally dripping with roasty beef fat. Don't repeat this squeeze move at home, by the way. We want all the juice that I'm showing you here to stay in the meat. I just kind of wanted to show you that this thing is wet. Now to serve, I'll drop a big old slice onto a warmed plate. Very important detail. Then I'll drizzle on a half ladle of salty beef jus, then finally gild this lily with a dollop of horsey cream. I'm trying to think of how I would describe it. It's like eating a red carpet. You guys, this plate of food is a big deal. It's one of the most insanely delicious things that you can eat at home, and the amount of pleasure that it provides feels like it should be illegal. If you like this video, then you're gonna love the one linked on your screen. It's a real hoot. There's tons of jokes and male nudity. Just click it. I'll see you there.